In February 1996, the world watched in shock as the perfect Kennedy fairy tale was shattered in the middle of a New York City park. Paparazzi cameras caught a vicious physical fight between John F. Kennedy Jr. and his then-fiancée Carolyn Bessette, culminating in John forcibly ripping her engagement ring from her finger. When this footage leaked, it went nuclear. The National Enquirer paid a staggering six-figure sum for the material, which was aired on national television, and the fallout was devastating. John's struggling magazine, George, began to spiral, but the public found an even easier target. Carolyn Bessette was villainized and forever branded as being high-maintenance and melodramatic, a sort of Yoko Ono figure within the Kennedy dynasty. This hostile reputation haunted her mental health for the next 3 years, casting a dark shadow over the couple until their tragic final moments in 1999, when their private jet, piloted by John, crashed into the ocean. Though the exact spark that triggered this vicious brawl in the park, as the media dubbed it at the time, still ultimately remains a mystery, we'll dive into 4 possible factors that may have contributed to it taking place. First, there was John's grief following Jackie Kennedy's death in 1994. We'll get into why it was still fresh for John 2 years later. Then, there was the psychological toll of being hunted by the paparazzi 24/7. But the most explosive claims involve secrets that didn't come out until many years later, including cheating allegations and possibly even a hidden pregnancy. To a public that was voracious for celebrity gossip and eager to dehumanize celebrities, this incident was as juicy as it got. But they knew, obviously, the kind of media glare they were under, and they did try to guard their privacy otherwise. I mean, they managed to keep their destination wedding a secret from the media for 2 whole days. I know it sounds like I'm making fun of them. I'm not. It's actually impressive considering the kind of scrutiny they were under. So if they did so fiercely guard themselves, how could they allow such a public crash out to happen in the first place? And what does this incident tell us about the toxic relationship between the Kennedys and a public that both adored and despised them at the same time? Let's figure it out. Hello, my restless friends. Welcome to Too Lady to Rest, where we talk about art, culture, and all things vintage gossip. The video in question was captured on February 25th, 1996, by photographer Angie Cochran and her then business partner Ken Katz, who were paid a rumored sum of between $100,000 and $250,000 for the footage. According to a 2024 interview she gave to the Daily Mail, Cochran claims she was watching the couple extra close that day because the auction of Jackie Kennedy's personal items following her death in 1994 had been announced just that morning on the New York Times. And get this, because JFK Jr. had been so close with his mother Jackie, the moment Cochran saw him carrying a copy of the paper, she knew he would be particularly emotional and volatile that day, and thus more likely to act impulsively and give the photographers some juicy material. Yikes. According to Cochran's claims, the couple began by walking their dog Friday to their usual spot, Battery Park. In a deliberate attempt to keep rival photographers from knowing where to find the couple, the Enquirer originally reported that the fight had taken place in Washington State Park, which some sources still repeat as being the place where the fight took place. But Cochran confirms that it actually took place in Battery Park. During the walk, something, we're not sure what, triggers an argument that appears to quickly escalate into a physical altercation, with John violently grabbing Carolyn's hand and supposedly removing her engagement ring, which was a replica of one of his mother's favorite rings. Okay, I'm gonna go off on a tiny little tangent here. A replica? Really? I mean, heirloom rings I get, right? I mean, it's still a guy's mother's ring. I find it a little weird, but sure, it's a priceless heirloom. I get it. But a replica? Like, at that point, just make a new ring, right? What do you guys think? Anyways, Cochran believes the ring was broken during the scuffle, as she says that John supposedly looked down and picked up 2 pieces, though I couldn't find any footage of that specific moment. As John walks away, Carolyn then runs at John and tackles him from behind, grabbing his neck. We later see them continue to argue passionately, getting in each other's faces and pushing each other around. Angie Cochran says that witnessing the whole thing made her extremely uncomfortable, though I guess not enough to stop stop her from making hundreds of thousands of dollars from it. Cochran was also the one to claim that the original trigger of the fight might have been about cheating, but more on that later. First, let's dive into some much-needed context. A few months before the fight, John had launched his pet project, the politics and pop culture magazine, George. After a couple of wildly successful issues, the hype of the magazine's launch died down, and advertisers began losing interest. In fact, when the footage of the fight first dropped, John's business partner in the magazine, Michael Berman, was actually in Milan meeting with potential advertisers. Magazine employees reported that John and Michael Berman had a volatile relationship to begin with, and Berman was furious with John for not even warning about the scandal in advance. He allegedly feared that John would be branded as a wife-beater and that would hurt the magazine, to which John allegedly replied that the video would prove that Carolyn was the initial aggressor. Indeed, in a culture steeped in misogyny, the public needed no convincing that their beloved prince was being victimized by an evil, bad woman who was there to take him away from them. And after all, America's love affair with JFK Jr. began before he was even born. When his father, John F. Kennedy Sr., was elected President of the United States in 1960, his wife Jackie was pregnant with John, meaning he became used to being photographed and watched from a pretty early age. Fully aware of John's endearing effect in the eyes of the public, JFK would arrange photo ops when Jackie, who shunned any unnecessary exposure of the children, was away. But one moment was especially powerful in cementing John's public image forever. On the day of his 3rd birthday, John made the papers as he saluted during the funeral of his assassinated father, capturing the hearts and attention of the media-consuming public for decades to come. Most people old enough to remember JFK's assassination probably have this image burned into their minds as the American people projected onto this adorable little boy their feelings of loss, grief, and orphanhood following President Kennedy's assassination. But this very real and very genuine feeling, though itself kind of manufactured by Jackie Kennedy and her Camelot myth, it sold a lot of papers, and thus there was an incentive to reinforce it. And that's what the media did, relentlessly. By the way, if you enjoy reflective cultural deep dives on mostly dead celebrities, take a moment to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss my upcoming video on why marrying a Kennedy was a nightmare, actually. Does anyone know where I can get a cheap Jackie Kennedy-style wig? I'm asking for a friend. During John's childhood, the intensely private Jackie Kennedy was pressured by the media to live up to the ideal of America's widow, a role she found both impossible and exhausting while navigating the trauma of not one, but 2 assassinations. To manage this, Jackie developed a shrewd approach. She would feed the press these carefully scripted images of a happy family life, believing that if she acted as the director of their public image, she was able to satisfy the media's hunger while protecting her children from being captured in awkward or negative moments. This strategy was mostly successful, though she couldn't keep every single embarrassing moment from being caught by photographers. This environment profoundly shaped John, who learned from an early age that he was essentially 2 different people: the public icon carrying the burden of his father's legacy, and a private man seeking to develop his own authentic identity. Because he went to school in New York City for most of the year, as he grew up, John became a consummate New Yorker, who viewed the paparazzi who chased him as more of a nuisance than a threat. He famously just tuned them out and even allegedly used wigs and dresses to disguise himself as he rode his iconic bike around Manhattan. He became basically a character in New York City. As we can see, John internalized his mother's media lessons, adopting a philosophy of giving a little to get a little, participating in the press in his own terms so he could get moments of peace. By the time People magazine named him America's Most Eligible Bachelor in 1986 and the sexiest man alive in 1988, he had successfully transitioned from a tragic orphan into a cultural superstar. It's hard to overstate just how famous JFK Jr. was. We don't get celebrities like that anymore. He was basically the Lady Di of America, with the added difference that, unlike Diana, coverage about John was overwhelmingly positive. In fact, the positive perception of JFK Jr. was so ubiquitous that even the iconic 90s sitcom Seinfeld had an episode in which the main female character, Elaine, tries to get a date with America's most eligible bachelor.
John F. Kennedy JFKJr.
As I'm sure you can imagine, this overwhelming public adoration made actually dating JFK Jr. a pretty daunting task. Not only did the woman in question have to live up to the high standards of John's mother and sister, whom John adored and whose opinion he greatly valued, but anyone who actually managed to snag America's sexiest bachelor alive, or whatever that was, had to contend with the envy, jealousy, and distrust of the general public. That was hard enough for John's famous girlfriends, like actresses Sarah Jessica Parker and Daryl Hannah. Parker later shared that she couldn't handle being constantly upstaged by John's overwhelming fame and beauty, while Hannah was allegedly disliked by Jackie and John's sister Caroline for being an attention-seeking Hollywood star. Now imagine someone who's never been famous, never experienced anything like the kind of scrutiny the Kennedys were under, suddenly stepping out of relative anonymity into this.
How was the honeymoon, John? Hold it, please. Nice and we're not getting it, John. Are there any little Johns on the way? John, we're not getting it. Can you back up and look this way, Carolyn? Are they look this way, John? John.
That was the experience of Carolyn Bessette, who worked as a personal stylist at Calvin Klein at the time. John and Carolyn's first meeting is still somewhat enshrouded in mystery. There are two different versions of the story out there. The first, widely circulated by the media at the time, is that they met in 1993 while jogging in Central Park, like a perfect meet-cute moment from a romantic comedy. Now, we know this version of the story isn't true, since many of John's personal friends, including former Real Housewife Carol Radziwill, who was married to John's cousin and best friend Anthony Radziwill, placed Carolyn in John's life as early as 1990. The second and more likely version is that they met around 1990 at a charity event hosted by Calvin Klein, and then subsequently met again when John went to purchase clothes at Calvin Klein, and Carolyn Bessette was assigned as his personal stylist. Though they were both seeing other people and wouldn't officially date until 1994, they connected right away, and John in particular was reportedly smitten with Carolyn. But it wasn't just her clean girl good looks that mesmerized John. Carolyn was the ultimate cool girl, and she treated John as if he wasn't famous at all. Her boss at Calvin Klein, Susan Sokol, described, quote, "She wasn't intimidated. She had a wonderful ease about her. She was comfortable with anyone, and she had a lot of self-confidence," end quote. John reportedly pursued her persistently, believing she was the first girl to ever see the real him, and eventually he became convinced she was the one. For her part, though Carolyn acted cool and unimpressed, she described him to friends as staggeringly handsome and allegedly had nursed a crush on him since 1988. She was also highly protective of John and often suspected those around him of using him for clout, a jealous streak that might have something to do with what triggered the fight in the park, as we'll get into shortly. In addition to gravitating towards Carolyn's independent and passionate personality, John saw Carolyn as an equal and supposedly hungered for her approval, to the point of even involving her in major decisions at George, to the annoyance of his business partner, Michael Berman. Remember how they didn't get along great to begin with? Yeah, this didn't help. It sounds like John and Carolyn were genuinely in love, at least at first. But the thing is that they both had a fiery temper, and friends described their dynamic as volatile, fighting one moment and passionately making out the next. This sure seems to track with the topic of our video here, their 1996 brawl in the park, especially when we look at the whole thing. After the main altercation I described at the beginning of the video, where John removed Carolyn's finger and she then tackled him from the back, and then they sort of yelled in each other's faces, John was later seen crying as he sat on the curb. Though he appears to give Carolyn her ring back, they soon resumed their fighting, reportedly over the dog's leash, with Angie Cochran claiming that she heard John say, "You've already taken my ring, I'm not gonna let you take my dog too," or something like that, to which Carolyn supposedly replied, "It's our dog." But you can't really hear that in the video. That's Angie Cochran's claim. Carolyn then appears to bend down to console John, only to then be seen once again yelling at him and then storming off. Finally, before returning home, the couple appears to make up, holding each other and whispering in each other's ears for a long moment. Though it comes across as such a dramatic and potentially relationship-ending moment, Carolyn and John went on to get married several months later. And on their wedding day, the couple is described as very much in love. So is that all there is to it? A regular, everyday fight that just happened to be caught on camera? Well, no. You see, as their relationship became known to the public and the spot next to John F. Kennedy Jr. became unavailable and occupied by this very real, if aspirational woman, Carolyn soon realized that she was in much, much deeper than she thought.
Please don't get so close to me.
Now, as we mentioned before, because John was so familiar with the spotlight, being in it seemed to him as natural as breathing. He knew how to talk to the media. He knew how much to smile, the right thing to say, and most importantly, he learned to tune them out completely. John F. Kennedy Jr. was a frequent sight in 90s Manhattan, zooming around on his bike as he ducked photographers and basically continued to live his life just as he wished, despite the photographers. But Carolyn, remember, a private citizen who up to this point had never had any significant notoriety at all, had a much harder time dealing with the dozen or so photographers who waited outside their apartment on any given day. They followed Carolyn around wherever she went, shouting insults and provocations to try to get a reaction. Carolyn had no media training. She was great one-on-one, extremely charming, but she didn't know how to talk to the press or smile and look cute and happy when she wasn't feeling like it. She completely rejected the media scrutiny and viewed it as the violent intrusion that it was. This often caused her to feel extremely anxious and frustrated, which manifested as anger thanks to her explosive temper. Carolyn allegedly became increasingly reclusive, eventually quitting her job and often refusing to leave the apartment, spending all day with only her dog, Friday, and her own racing thoughts for company. She also quit going to therapy when paparazzi followed her there and photographed her coming out of a session. Going through all this took a heartbreaking toll on Carolyn's mental health. Sources at George Magazine offices, one of the only places she still felt safe going to, describe her previously warm, vivid, and outgoing personality morphing into something quote-unquote dark and paranoid, a hunted animal that suspected any and all around her of ill intent. Although this Brawl in the Park episode took place in early 1996, before John and Carolyn had even gotten married, it seems that Carolyn's mental health continued to decline after that. A year later, in 1997, Princess Diana's tragic death as she was chased by paparazzi allegedly sent Carolyn, who saw herself in Diana, into an emotional tailspin. Throughout all this, John was at a loss. Remember, his easy and smooth handling of the press, taught to him by his mother Jackie, was about giving them a little something in return for getting a little privacy. But Carolyn rejected that approach completely, refusing to give the press even an inch. She saw John's negotiating with the press as a kind of weakness, as John letting people walk all over him, when she felt that he should stand up for himself and for her and directly fight the media's harassment of them. But John ultimately couldn't see the situation the way Carolyn did. She was terrified of them. He was not. While she felt hunted and compared the paparazzi to a pack of wolves, John saw them as no big deal and part of a circus they had to simply learn to ignore. This was the Kennedy way, had been for decades. And John could be extremely dismissive and insensitive about Carolyn's mental anguish. I think this quote from John's personal assistant, Rosemary Terenzio, perfectly describes the way the media pressure affected their relationship. Quote, "The constant scrutiny of their marriage had taken a toll. Where they once laughed off problems and misunderstandings, they now blew them out of proportion and were both too stubborn to work things out on their own." End quote. And this was not the only significant issue they disagreed on. Many sources around the couple claimed that John and Carolyn were not on the same page when it came to having kids. While John was allegedly looking forward to becoming a dad, Carolyn, though she did want kids eventually, didn't yet feel ready to do so. Not only was John extremely busy with his magazine, and not only was John described by friends as being sort of like a big kid, with Carolyn having to be the adult in the relationship, which can be exhausting, but the press situation made Carolyn even more apprehensive about having kids with John. She wasn't confident that she could protect her children from the harassment. After all, she couldn't even protect herself. And she allegedly told their friend Billy Noonan, quote, "How can I bring JFK III into this world? They'll never leave me alone," end quote. Here's the thing though. John's biographer Christopher Anderson claims that Carolyn might have actually been pregnant during the infamous Brawl. Anderson goes on to claim that Carolyn had already had 2 abortions, but that John allegedly didn't know about them, and that Carolyn knew that John wouldn't want her to get another abortion. Anderson speculates that keeping such a secret from John might have contributed to her anguished mental state, possibly leading to the fight actually taking place in public. He goes on to claim that Carolyn miscarried several weeks later and that John never found out about it. Look, I'd never vouch for any of these people. Like, who knows what they were up to, right? But I will say that some of these claims seem a little out there for me. Like, this is a couple that's supposed to be so close and so passionately in love, at least according to their friends and family. Would you really go through multiple pregnancies and terminations without your loving partner ever finding out about it? These are really brutal things to go through without telling your partner, or at least arousing some suspicion. That said, these are Kennedys we're talking about. Not only do rich people play by different rules, but I guess when you're that high profile, it often happens that a couple can lead completely parallel lives. We know that John's father, JFK, certainly did this throughout his marriage to Jackie. So is it really that impossible that John and Carolyn might have had this kind of privacy from each other that regular people simply don't experience because they don't own multiple homes and can't leave the country at the drop of a hat? Well, according to a controversial source, that's exactly how it was. In 2001, former Calvin Klein model Michael Bergen, who was Carolyn's boyfriend when she met John, published a tell-all about his supposed years-long affair with Carolyn Bessette, which he claims lasted well into her marriage with John. Now, many of Bergen's claims are disputed, so take this with the appropriate amount of salt, but he does paint a picture of Carolyn that, if true, suggests she was just the kind of person, actually, to make these kinds of impulsive and drastic decisions without consulting her partner, including getting an abortion, which Bergen claims Carolyn did several times throughout their affair. And this kind of impulsiveness does somewhat track with the way she's described by those around her. Bergen is likely the main source of the rumor that Carolyn was pregnant during the fight, so it's hard to know if there's any validity to it. It certainly could be true, and if it were, it certainly would have contributed to her being on edge that day. But she might have had another reason to be stressed. According to Bergen, Carolyn justified carrying on with their affair by claiming that she believed John was cheating on her too. And there is one other account that kind of corroborates that she felt that way. Remember paparazzo Angie Cochran, who captured the photos and video of the fight in the first place? Well, she claimed to the Daily Mail that during the fight, she actually overheard John telling Carolyn, quote, "I don't even know her. I don't know what you're talking about," end quote. This contemporary broadcast of the video also mentions that the trigger of the fight might have been Carolyn accusing John of cheating on her.
The explosive lover spat reportedly started after the 28-year-old beauty accused her boyfriend of flirting with another woman at a party.
If Cochran's telling the truth, that would suggest that Carolyn at least suspected John of cheating on her. It seems like Carolyn was at least keenly aware of the Kennedys' reputation with women, reportedly telling a friend, quote, "I'm definitely not that pathetic Kennedy wife who'll stay home with the kids while her husband is out screwing around. I'm that pissed off Kennedy wife who'll be in prison because she took matters into her own hands," end quote. Carolyn also reportedly felt insecure about John's general desirability and sex appeal, and she became increasingly bothered by how openly other people thirsted for her man. After all, this was people's most eligible, sexy man that she was with. Unlike John's effortless good looks, Carolyn, like many women, put a lot of effort into her appearance and felt pressure to look like she was worthy of being with JFK Jr. Many of John's friends find it unlikely publicly that he was cheating on Carolyn. Biographer Stephen Gillen, who knew JFK Jr. personally, says that John understood that Carolyn was cynical about marriage and cheating because her own father had left her mother when she was a little girl. Gillen claims that at one point, John confessed to friends that he wished he could cheat on her, but that he didn't want to publicly humiliate her like his father had done to his mother. Now, that might be the case, but there's also ample evidence that John's relationship with Carolyn overlapped majorly with his relationship with actress Daryl Hannah, whom he began seeing while he was still with girlfriend Christina Hagg. He also allegedly kept a friendship with benefits with model Julie Baker, who looked eerily like Jackie Kennedy, by the way, and that friendship with benefits allegedly overlapped with his relationships with Daryl Hannah and Carolyn Bessette, at least. So, while I would love nothing more than to believe that JFK Jr. was different, he was not like his father, his grandfather, his uncles, his cousins. He was different. But wouldn't that be kind of buying into the whole Kennedy fantasy in the first place? The one that was so profitable that Carolyn Bessette had to be vilified and harassed to preserve? Because yes, that is explicitly what happened. Journalist Richard Blow, who'd been an executive editor at George, recounts an occasion when John interviewed National Enquirer editor Ian Calder. You see, sometime before that, an attempt had been made to blackmail John over some alleged photographs of him in a gay bar. So John asked Calder if the blackmail attempt had come from the National Enquirer. But Calder confidently denied it, saying, quote, "Even if we had great pictures of you in a gay bar, we would never have used them, even if the pictures were true, because our readers consider you a beloved figure. They would have killed us for doing that. You're the little boy saluting his father." End quote. I find that piece of information extremely telling. It suggests something that we now see even more starkly with the internet and the techno-fascism we're sliding into, that our feelings and opinions are not entirely our own spontaneous creation, but deeply shaped by propaganda and whoever controls the media narrative. The image of baby John saluting his father's casket was indeed powerful and provoked a visceral reaction in the public. But that doesn't mean the public was entirely or organically to blame for putting JFK Jr. on a pedestal. In fact, this makes it clear that the media actively manipulated the audience in John's favor, leveraging the emotional connection the public felt with John in order to make money. Ian Calder's reply to John strongly suggests that the National Enquirer would never have published the footage of the fight if there was any possibility of it not fitting the public narrative for John. So it wasn't just about exposing the dramatic lives of celebs, but about actively feeding a certain complacency, a conservative mindset that Carolyn had to be the villain because John, this John, could certainly do no wrong. And of course, a nuanced narrative where both people are flawed human beings dealing with an extraordinary situation is too boring to sell papers. This is why, while I understand the criticism of continuing to talk about the Bessette-Kennedys when in life they clearly prefer to be left alone, at least Carolyn did, I think it's important to try to understand what made these icons human beings so that we can look back and understand where exactly we as the audience might have been manipulated into viewing them a certain way, and how we can avoid falling into that trap in the future. Not only so we don't mistreat celebrities, but so we don't apply those kinds of reductive, unquestioned views onto ourselves, our loved ones, and our communities, where we more than ever need to approach relationships with an open mind and an open heart if we have any hope of rehabilitating this ball of dirt we all live on. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, click that like button and watch this one next.